My name is Graham Ellsworth, and I'm 48 years old. For 20 years, I dedicated my life to Meridian Financial Corp here in Toronto. 20 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and canceled vacations. 20 years of building relationships, closing deals, and watching this company grow from a mid-sized firm into a major player in the Canadian financial sector. I started as a junior analyst fresh out of the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. I worked my way up through sheer determination and integrity. No shortcuts, no politics, just solid work and honest dealings. By 2023, I was Senior Vice President of Corporate Development, earning 260,000 Canadian dollars annually, plus bonuses that often pushed my total compensation above 320,000. The morning of March 15, 2025 started like any other. I was in my corner office on the 32nd floor of First Canadian Place, reviewing final documents for the biggest deal of my career. We were negotiating the acquisition of North Star Investment Group for $50 million. It was complex, involving cross-border regulations, SEC filings, and due diligence that had taken 8 months to complete. I'd been the lead negotiator from day one. The North Star executives trusted me. Their CEO, Robert Hayes, had specifically requested that I remain the primary contact throughout the process. We were literally hours away from signing. The lawyers were preparing the final paperwork, and I was coordinating with our accounting team to ensure all financial structures were properly documented. At 11:37 a.m., my phone chimed with an email notification. The sender was HR Director Sandra Morrison. The subject line read, "Employment termination, effective immediately." If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. I stared at the screen for a full minute before opening the message. It was brief, clinical, and devastating. Graham, your employment with Meridian Financial Corp is terminated effective immediately. Please surrender all company property and vacate the premises by end of business today. Your final paycheck and benefits information will be mailed to your home address. Thank you for your service. No explanation, no meeting, no phone call. Just a cold, impersonal email ending 2 decades of my professional life. I'd seen people fired before, but never like this. Never in the middle of a major transaction. Never without cause or warning. My first instinct was anger, but I've learned to control my emotions in this business. Instead, I sat back in my leather chair and thought carefully. This wasn't random. The timing was too calculated, too precise. Someone wanted me out before the North Star deal closed. I called Sandra's office directly. Her assistant Jennifer answered nervously. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ellsworth, but Sandra is in meetings all day and can't take calls." "Jennifer, it's urgent. I need to speak with her about my termination." There was a pause. "She said you might call. She asked me to tell you that all questions should be directed to legal." Legal. That confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't a standard layoff or performance issue. This was something else entirely. I gathered my thoughts and opened my desk drawer where I kept copies of all my important files. 20 years of working in corporate finance had taught me one valuable lesson. Always keep your own records. I had documentation on every major deal, every client interaction, and every decision I'd been involved in. More importantly, I had detailed records of the North Star acquisition, including emails, financial projections, and meeting notes. As I packed my personal items, I noticed something interesting. The office was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning. Several executives who should have been in meetings were nowhere to be seen. My colleague, David Richardson, approached my office cautiously. He was one of the few people I trusted completely in this company. "Graham, what's happening? I heard Sandra was looking for you this morning." "They terminated me, David, by email. No warning, no explanation." His face went pale. "That's impossible. You're leading the North Star deal. We're supposed to sign tomorrow." "Exactly." I handed him my business cards and client contact list. "David, I need you to do me a favor. Don't let them know we talked, but keep your eyes open." "Something isn't right here." He nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. What are you going to do? I closed my briefcase and looked around my office one last time. I'm going to make some phone calls, starting with Martin Kavanagh. Martin Kavanagh was the best employment lawyer in Toronto. I'd known him for 12 years, ever since he'd helped my brother-in-law with a wrongful dismissal case. At 52, Martin had built his reputation on taking on large corporations and winning. That afternoon, I sat in Martin's downtown office on Bay Street, watching him review the termination email on his tablet. His expression grew more serious with each word. Martin had the kind of presence that commanded respect in courtrooms. Tall, silver-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Graham, this is highly irregular," he said, setting down the device. "Terminating a senior executive without cause, especially during a major transaction, raises immediate red flags. Tell me about the North Star deal." I pulled out my personal files and spread them across his mahogany desk. 8 months of negotiations, $50 million acquisition. I've been the primary contact since day one. The deal was scheduled to close tomorrow morning. Martin examined the documents carefully. Who else had access to the deal structure and timeline? The executive committee, CEO Richard Brennan, CFO Patricia Walsh, and General Counsel Thomas Mitchell, plus Sandra Morrison from HR, obviously. Any recent conflicts, performance issues, personality clashes? I shook my head. Nothing. My last performance review was outstanding. I've exceeded my targets every year for the past 5 years. Martin leaned back in his chair. "Graham, based on what you've shown me, this looks like a potential case of wrongful dismissal. But there's something else here. The timing suggests they wanted you out before the deal closed. Why would they risk derailing a $50 million transaction?" "That's what I've been wondering. Here's what we're going to do. I need you to document everything, every email, every meeting note, every conversation related to this deal, and your termination. We're going to file a wrongful dismissal claim. But more importantly, we're going to investigate whether there's been any breach of fiduciary duty or corporate misconduct." Over the next 3 days, I worked systematically through my files. 20 years of corporate experience had taught me to be thorough with documentation. I had copies of emails dating back 6 months, including several exchanges that now seemed suspicious. The first red flag appeared in an email from CFO Patricia Walsh to CEO Richard Brennan from February 20th, 2025. I'd been copied, but the message was coded in corporate speak. We should consider alternative leadership structures for the North Star transition to ensure optimal integration and stakeholder alignment. At the time, I'd assumed it was typical executive planning. Now it read like a premeditated strategy to remove me from the equation. The second red flag was more damning. On March 10th, 5 days before my termination, General Counsel Thomas Mitchell had requested copies of all my files related to the North Star acquisition. His email stated it was for legal review and compliance verification. I'd provided everything, assuming it was standard procedure. But here's what made it suspicious. Thomas had specifically asked for my personal notes and client correspondence, materials that weren't normally included in legal reviews. I called Robert Hayes at North Star on March 18th, 3 days after my termination. Robert and I had developed a solid working relationship over 8 months of negotiations. His reaction to my firing was telling. "Graham, what the hell happened?" he said when I reached him at his Chicago office. "Patricia Walsh called yesterday saying there had been personnel changes and that Thomas Mitchell would be handling the closing. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Robert. What exactly did Patricia tell you?" "She was vague. Said you'd decided to pursue other opportunities. Graham, I'll be honest with you. I'm not comfortable with this. You know our deal inside and out. Thomas doesn't. I'm considering postponing the closing." This was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. "Robert, I can't advise you on your business decisions, but I can tell you that my departure wasn't voluntary. I figured as much. Listen, if you end up starting your own firm or joining another company, call me. We do a lot of deals, and we prefer working with people we trust." That conversation confirmed my suspicions. Meridian had risked damaging their relationship with a major client by removing me without explanation. No rational business would do that unless they had ulterior motives. Martin was intrigued when I shared Robert's reaction. This strengthens our case significantly. They've potentially damaged the client relationship and the deal itself by terminating you improperly. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. David Richardson called me at home on March 20th. He sounded nervous. "Graham, we need to talk. Not over the phone. Can you meet me at that coffee shop on Queen Street tomorrow morning?" I met David at Balzac's Coffee at 8 a.m. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Graham, something weird is happening at the office. After you left, Patricia called an emergency meeting with the senior staff. She said the North Star deal was being restructured and that there might be additional opportunities for career advancement." "What kind of opportunities?" She was cryptic, but she mentioned that with your departure there would be room for promotion in the corporate development division. She specifically mentioned that the successful closing of North Star could lead to significant bonuses for the team. I felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "David, did she mention anything about the deal terms or structure?" "That's the strange part. She said there had been minor adjustments to the acquisition agreement, but that everything was on track for closing. Graham, I've worked on enough deals to know that last-minute changes to a $50 million acquisition aren't minor." David reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "Graham, I probably shouldn't be doing this, but I copied something before I left last night. It's the current version of the North Star acquisition agreement." I opened the envelope and scanned the document. What I saw made my blood run cold. The purchase price was still $50 million, but the structure had been completely altered. Instead of a straightforward acquisition, they'd converted it to a merger arrangement that would result in significant stock options for Meridian's executive team. More importantly, there was a clause I'd never seen before: a consultant fee of $2 million payable to a shell company called Northern Advisory Services. I'd never heard of this company, but I had a strong suspicion about who owned it. "David, this isn't the deal we negotiated." The structure we agreed to with North Star was completely different. I photographed every page of the document with my phone. This was the smoking gun Martin and I needed. They hadn't just fired me to steal credit for the deal. They'd altered the deal itself to enrich themselves at the expense of both companies. That afternoon, I sat in Martin's office again, this time with concrete evidence of corporate misconduct. "Graham, this is no longer just a wrongful dismissal case," Martin said, studying the altered agreement. "This is potentially fraud. They've changed the fundamental structure of a deal you negotiated, added unauthorized fees, and removed you to prevent you from objecting." "What's our next move?" Martin smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "We're going to file a comprehensive lawsuit: wrongful dismissal, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud. But first we're going to do something they won't expect." "What's that?" "We're going to call Robert Hayes and tell him exactly what's happened. If North Star wasn't aware of these changes, they're victims too. And Graham, there's something else you should know. I did some research on Northern Advisory Services. It was incorporated 3 weeks ago. The registered owner is Patricia Walsh's husband." Martin wasted no time. The next morning, we contacted Robert Hayes with a conference call that would change everything. Robert's reaction was exactly what we'd anticipated when Martin explained the situation. "Let me understand this correctly," Robert said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Meridian fired Graham without cause, altered our negotiated agreement without our consent, and added unauthorized fees that would go to a company owned by their CFO's husband?" "That's correct," Martin replied. "Graham has documentation proving that the deal structure you're being asked to sign is not what you originally negotiated. This is unbelievable. Patricia Walsh assured me yesterday that everything was proceeding normally. She said the minor changes were just technical adjustments for regulatory compliance." I spoke up. "Robert, I have copies of our original correspondence and meeting notes. The structure they're proposing now would cost North Star an additional $3 million in hidden fees and reduced equity positions. Graham, I need those documents immediately. We're supposed to close tomorrow and my board is meeting tonight to give final approval. If what you're telling me is true, we're calling off this deal." After the call ended, Martin looked satisfied. "Graham, they just lost their $50 million deal. But that's just the beginning." True to his word, Robert Hayes contacted Meridian's executives that afternoon. David Richardson called me at 6 p.m. to report the chaos that had erupted. "Graham, you should see this place. Patricia and Richard have been locked in the conference room for 3 hours. Thomas keeps running back and forth between his office and theirs. Sandra from HR left early, claiming she had a family emergency. What about the North Star deal? Dead." Robert Hayes sent a formal letter this afternoon terminating all negotiations. He specifically cited material misrepresentation and breach of good faith as grounds for withdrawal. "Graham, the executives are panicking. This deal represented nearly 20% of their projected annual revenue." The next day, Martin filed our lawsuit in the Superior Court of Ontario. The claim was comprehensive: wrongful dismissal, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conspiracy. But Martin had also done something clever. He'd filed for an emergency injunction to freeze all assets related to the Northern Advisory Services account. "Graham, here's what's going to happen," Martin explained. "They're going to try to settle quickly and quietly to avoid public scrutiny. But we're not going to make it easy for them." He was right. Within 24 hours of filing, Thomas Mitchell called Martin's office requesting an immediate meeting. "They want to discuss a settlement," Martin told me. "Thomas claims this is all a misunderstanding and that they're prepared to offer you a generous severance package." The meeting took place in a neutral conference room at another law firm downtown. Thomas Mitchell arrived with Patricia Walsh and an external lawyer I didn't recognize. They looked haggard and defensive. Thomas started with what seemed like a rehearsed speech. "Graham, we regret that your departure wasn't handled in the most professional manner. There were internal communications issues that led to some confusion about the timing and process." Martin interrupted. "Thomas, let's skip the corporate speak. You terminated my client without cause during a major transaction, altered deal terms without client consent, and attempted to enrich yourselves through fraudulent fees. We have documented evidence of all of this." Patricia Walsh spoke up, her voice strained. "The Northern Advisory Services arrangement was a legitimate consulting agreement. We brought in additional expertise to ensure the deal's success." "Consulting for what?" I asked. "I handled every aspect of this negotiation for 8 months. What consulting did you need that required a $2 million fee to your husband's 3-week-old company?" The room fell silent. Patricia's face went pale, and Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Martin placed a folder on the table. "Here's what we know. You incorporated Northern Advisory Services on February 22nd, 3 days after your email about alternative leadership structures. You altered the North Star agreement to include unauthorized fees. You terminated Graham to prevent him from objecting to these changes." The external lawyer whispered something to Thomas, who nodded reluctantly. "What would it take to resolve this matter?" Thomas asked. Martin smiled coldly. "Full reinstatement, back pay, public acknowledgement of wrongful dismissal, and a comprehensive investigation into all deals handled by the current executive team over the past 2 years." "That's impossible," Patricia said quickly. "The board would never approve that kind of investigation." "Then we'll let the courts and the Ontario Securities Commission handle it," Martin replied. But as we stood to leave, Thomas played his final card. "Graham, you should know that we've already contacted your other clients. We've informed them that you violated confidentiality agreements and that they shouldn't do business with you in the future." I felt my anger flare for the first time since this ordeal began, but Martin placed a restraining hand on my arm. "Thomas, you just made a serious mistake," Martin said calmly. "You've now added defamation and tortious interference with business relationships to our lawsuit." That evening, David Richardson called with more news. "Graham, 3 more senior staff members approached me today, asking questions about what really happened with your termination. Word is spreading that the North Star deal fell apart because of executive misconduct. Also, Jennifer from legal told me that the Ontario Securities Commission called this afternoon, asking for information about recent acquisitions. The OSC is already investigating? Apparently, someone filed a whistleblower complaint. Jennifer thinks it might have been Robert Hayes. The dominoes were falling faster than anyone had anticipated. What started as my wrongful dismissal had exposed a pattern of corporate misconduct that was now attracting regulatory attention. Martin called the next morning with an update that confirmed our strategy was working. "Graham, I just received a call from their new legal counsel. They're prepared to make a substantial settlement offer, but they want to include a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement." "What kind of offer?" 2 years' salary, full benefits continuation, and a positive reference letter. In exchange, you agree never to discuss the circumstances of your departure or the North Star deal. What do you think? I think we can do better. The OSC investigation changes everything. They can't afford a prolonged legal battle now. Let's push harder. The turning point came 2 weeks later. Martin called me at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday with news that exceeded our most optimistic expectations. "Graham, the Ontario Securities Commission just issued a formal investigation notice to Meridian Financial. They're examining all major transactions from the past 3 years, not just the North Star deal." "How did that happen so quickly?" "Robert Hayes didn't just file a whistleblower complaint about your case. He also provided them with information about 2 other deals where Meridian executives may have engaged in similar misconduct. The OSC is treating this as a pattern of corporate fraud, not an isolated incident." That afternoon, David Richardson called with an update from inside the company. His voice was excited but cautious. "Graham, the office is in complete chaos. Richard Brennan called an emergency board meeting yesterday. Patricia Walsh has been suspended pending the investigation, and Thomas Mitchell has been placed on administrative leave. What about Sandra Morrison? She resigned yesterday morning. Her resignation letter mentioned irreconcilable differences with current corporate governance practices. Graham, she basically admitted that she knew the termination was improper. Martin and I met that evening to discuss our strategy. The landscape had changed completely in our favor. "Graham, they're going to offer you everything you want," Martin said. "But more importantly, you're in a position to choose your own ending to this story." "What do you mean?" "The board wants to clean house. They've made it clear that they're willing to terminate the remaining executives and offer you Richard Brennan's position as CEO. They see you as the only senior executive who wasn't involved in the misconduct." I sat back in my chair, absorbing the magnitude of what Martin had just said. "They want me to run the company? Think about it logically. You have 20 years of institutional knowledge, an unblemished record, and the trust of major clients like Robert Hayes. From their perspective, you're the only person who can restore the company's credibility. What's the alternative? A settlement that would set you up for life. I estimate we could get $2.5 million minimum, plus damages for defamation and lost business opportunities. You could start your own firm or join a competitor as a senior partner." That night, I thought carefully about both options. The CEO position would be satisfying in many ways, a complete vindication and the ultimate reversal of fortune, but it would also mean returning to a company that had betrayed me, working with a board that had allowed the misconduct to happen. The next morning, I made my decision. I called Martin first. "I want the settlement, but with specific terms. I want a public apology acknowledging wrongful dismissal, full financial compensation, and a non-compete clause that prevents them from restricting my future business activities. And the CEO position? I'm going to decline it. Martin, I've learned something important from this experience. The problem wasn't just with Patricia Walsh or Thomas Mitchell. The problem was with a corporate culture that allowed this kind of behavior to flourish. I don't want to spend the next 5 years trying to fix something that's fundamentally broken." Martin smiled. "I think that's a wise decision. What are you planning to do instead?" "Robert Hayes and I have been discussing the possibility of starting a consulting firm together. We've already identified 3 other companies that want to work with us. The irony is that Meridian's misconduct has actually enhanced our reputations in the industry." The final settlement meeting took place 3 days later. Richard Brennan was gone. replaced by interim CEO Margaret Thompson, a respected executive brought in by the board to manage the crisis. Patricia Walsh and Thomas Mitchell were not present. Both had been terminated and were facing potential criminal charges. Margaret Thompson spoke first. "Graham, on behalf of Meridian Financial's Board of Directors, I want to offer you a formal apology. Your termination was improper, unjustified, and handled in a manner that violated both company policy and basic professional courtesy." She slid a document across the table. "We're prepared to offer you a settlement of 2.5 million Canadian dollars, plus legal fees, along with a public statement acknowledging wrongful dismissal." Martin reviewed the settlement agreement carefully. "This looks comprehensive. Graham, are you satisfied with these terms?" I nodded. "There's one more thing I want. I want a commitment that Meridian will implement new corporate governance procedures to prevent this kind of misconduct in the future." Margaret Thompson looked surprised, but pleased. "That's already in progress. We've hired external auditors to review all our procedures and implement industry best practices for executive oversight." 2 months later, in July 2025, I stood in the lobby of our new office building on King Street West. Hayes and Ellsworth Corporate Advisory had officially opened for business. Our first client was a technology company looking to acquire a competitor, a deal worth $75 million. Robert Hayes walked over and handed me a newspaper. "Graham, you should see this." The headline read, "Former Meridian executives face fraud charges." The article detailed how Patricia Walsh and Thomas Mitchell had been arrested by the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team. The investigation had revealed that they'd stolen nearly $8 million through fraudulent fees and altered agreements over a 3-year period. "Any regrets about not taking the CEO position?" Robert asked. I looked around our office where 5 talented professionals were working on deals that would generate honest profits for all parties involved. "None whatsoever. Robert, we built something clean here, something based on integrity and trust." That evening, I called David Richardson, who had joined our firm as a senior analyst after Meridian's restructuring. "David, how are things at the old office?" "Completely different. Margaret Thompson has implemented new procedures for everything. All major deals require dual approval, and there's an ethics hotline for reporting concerns. Graham, she actually uses your case as an example in the new employee orientation." "What kind of example?" "She tells new hires that the company's previous executives lost everything because they chose short-term greed over long-term integrity. She says that if they'd treated you fairly and maintained ethical practices, Meridian would still be one of Toronto's top financial firms instead of rebuilding from scandal." "What's the current state of the company?" "They're surviving, but it's been difficult. They lost about 40% of their client base after the fraud allegations became public. The regulatory fines alone cost them over $15 million. Any word on Patricia and Thomas?" "Their trial is scheduled for next year. The Crown Attorney says they're looking at 5 to 7 years in federal prison if convicted. Graham, their legal bills have apparently bankrupted both of them." After hanging up, I sat in my home office, the same room where I'd first read that termination email 5 months earlier. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. I'd learned that the most effective revenge isn't emotional or violent. It's simply allowing people to face the natural consequences of their own actions. Patricia Walsh and Thomas Mitchell had destroyed themselves through their own greed and dishonesty. I had simply refused to be a silent victim and had given them enough rope to hang themselves. More importantly, I'd discovered that being fired was the best thing that could have happened to my career. Hayes and Ellsworth was more successful in 4 months than I'd ever dreamed possible, and every client relationship was built on trust and mutual respect. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was a potential new client, the CEO of a manufacturing company looking for advice on a major expansion. "Mr. Ellsworth, I've been following your story in the business press. I'm impressed by how you handled that situation with Meridian. That's exactly the kind of integrity and professionalism we want in our financial advisor." As I scheduled our meeting, I realized that my reputation had been enhanced, not damaged, by the scandal. In the business world, People remember how you handle adversity, and my measured, strategic response had earned respect throughout the industry. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling us what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notifications for new stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.